Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Stephen Long. Welcome to the X Factor podcast, the podcast for leaders and by leaders. So today, my guest is Col Sean Finnan of the United States Air Force. And I want to read a disclaimer first. The views presented are those of Col Sean Finnan and do not necessarily represent the Department of Defense or its components. So Sean, thanks so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Doc Long, for having me. Excited to be here.
Oh, great. So why don't you tell everybody what you do and who you are?
Well, I guess a little bit about myself. I mean, first off, I'm a husband and a father. Been married for quite a few years. I won't, do the public math right this second, but I have three children. So a 13-year-old daughter, 11-year-old daughter, 9-year-old son. So first and foremost, husband, father. Like you said, I'm a colonel in the United States Air Force, but I guess some kind of context on where my perspective comes from. I also grew up in the Air Force. My dad spent 30 years in the Air Force as a pilot, and so moved all around the country, spent a lot of time in different schools, etc. And my mom served right alongside him in the capacity of a military spouse, which is probably a lot harder of the job. Mm-hmm. And then I grew up playing a lot of sports. And so I've carried a lot of those lessons in just through life on a lot of those, be a role model, practice, sacrifice for the betterment of the team. Those kind of lessons I think apply a lot to both life and leadership. And then what I do, that's hard to pin down. I would say first and foremost, I serve something bigger than myself. I think service comes in many forms, and mine just happens to be in the Air Force, but there's all kinds of ways to serve others and something bigger than yourself. And so as you mentioned, I guess formally, I am the commander of the 86 Operations Group here in Ramstein Air Base, Germany, which is comprised of 5 different squadrons, very diverse mission set, from flying C-130s and some DV type aircraft to air medical evacuation, and then some other kind of airfield type jobs of airfield management, air traffic control, weather, those kind of jobs. And so a very diverse organization. And so that's for the formal part, but I would say really I do my best to ensure that within my little sphere of influence that I keep the profession of arms stayed focused on the right things and healthy and of value.
Well, it certainly is of great value, particularly in this day and age, because there's just so much going on that it's mind-boggling. And so for not only what you do, but what you have to stay apprised of, I think everybody's grateful for you and your service. All right, so tell me, Sean, what do you think is the best aspect of being a leader?
Well, first, I think I would, not to say challenge you, but in the assumption that you're asking me that question because of the position I'm in. And I think you would agree with me that, leadership isn't based on a position. So, we all have the ability to be a leader. So I think, first off, especially in the organizations that I've led, I've always tried to think of the most important person as what I call the tactical doer. And so that's the person, regardless of rank, who actually accomplishes the mission. So, we can have really great strategy, operational approaches, but all of those things are contingent on being able to execute at the pointy end. And so the person who accomplishes that, I think, is the most important person in the organization. And everyone exists to support and train and serve them. And so I often remind people, hey, remember who we work for. It's not up the chain of command. So make sure that we're working downhill, so to speak. So, but I think, one of the greatest aspects of being a leader, I think, is just the ability to pay it forward. And, to be a caretaker of our lineage, a steward of the profession, to borrow a little of James Kerr in his book Legacy, where he talks about the All Blacks, and he says, leave the jersey in a better place. And so I really think that is the best aspect of being a leader, is just to groom those that will replace us. and that's especially important in an enduring profession like the Air Force or the profession of arms, because it can and will die if we don't keep it alive and healthy.
So that, so by grooming, the next, the next group of leaders, that succession plan, I would think that that's probably one of the more important responsibilities of leadership. So let me ask you, Sean. So what are you looking for in terms of qualities or attributes or behaviors from people who would make it into that, into that inner circle of people who you would look to groom?
Oh, there's so many dynamics that go into that, but I would say that really, whether I'm talking about an officer who's going to replace me or a senior enlisted, I'm always looking at character, competence, and judgment. So oftentimes especially within the Air Force, we focus a lot on accomplishment. And that makes perfect sense because we need to perform a mission. But especially in the profession of arms, that performance is really about the ethical and effective mission effectiveness. And so and when we do that, we instill a trust within the society that we serve. And that trust is, I think, more based on our character than it is really our performance. Because if we perform the mission, but we don't do it in an ethical way, it erodes the trust. And so when we build that trust, we're given quite a bit of autonomy to accomplish our mission. So it's kind of this revolving cycle. And so I would say that number one, it's the character. So we're always preaching about just being someone of good character. And there's a lot of different character traits out there, that we could go over. And then, competence, in that you need to be able to do the job that you've been assigned. And that changes as we move through our Air Force career. As a young, whether enlisted or officer, my expectation is that they become the technical expert. They are tactically proficient. And that's not to say they don't have the potential to be in a leadership position, because I think even in that realm, as a tactical expert, they lead through their tactical expertise. They provide an example, maybe instruction, maybe they're a part of a crew and that they lead in that regard. And then the last is judgment. I think I often tell those that I mentor, it doesn't matter what level of the organization you are in. We are always we always have to think about our judgment and decisions. Is this a decision I can make, or do I need to elevate this to my boss? And so it's this balancing act of getting people to make the hard call at their level, with giving them the tolerance to make mistakes with those decisions and that judgment. Because, as been said before, right, you gain judgment through bad decisions, really, and your experiences. And so you have to have some leeway in order to make some mistakes in order to develop that judgment. So I'd say character, competence, and judgment is really what I'm looking at when I'm evaluating, quote unquote, anyone.
And I think it's important to note that all three are fluid. Yeah. And
absolutely.
So, and I think that's something for the listeners to really, take hold of, is that they're all fluid and they can all continue to be developed. And they're really all developed through experiences. And I think when people take that approach of, this is an opportunity to develop judgment, to develop even greater competence, and even to expand my character, right? Then that whole idea of the fear of failure tends to dissipate. Right. Because like what you were saying is that you're working for something greater than yourself, but greater than just what's in front of you.
Right. And I think,
go ahead.
And I think too is, like, as you said, it's the journey mentality, right? Which relates to this grooming your replacement. So replacing me isn't necessarily the end of your journey, or even your journey at all. So it's just the fact that we keep the profession healthy and vibrant and moving forward. But that whole process is a journey, not a end state. And so I think when you have the journey mentality, you're more conscious of those small wins and losses, because you understand that we're not moving to an end state, we're just moving to a better state.
Mhm.
And so that growth mindset allows you to then say, okay, hey, maybe I screwed up this time, but I'm going to try a little better next time. And you're absolutely right on the fluidity of all three of those. I think it again relates to the growth mindset. If you ever think that you're fully baked, well, then you're done. We all have room to grow in character, competence, and judgment.
Yeah, well, what you said is prophetic. Is that if you think you're fully baked, you are.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So you might as well just stick a fork in you and take the next ride home.
Right, right.
Okay. All right. So let me ask you this. What advice would you give to other leaders regarding strategic execution? Not necessarily, composing or devising, a strategy, but as long as the strategy is sound, how do you get people to execute that strategy, to the fullest degree possible?
Well, I think again, it relates to this growth mindset. So one, in that the strategy is not to get to an end state; it's just to get better. It's a better state. And so therefore, the first is that you have this journey mentality, and then to execute the strategy, I think you have to think of risk and failure kind of on a scale. And so we often talk in the military about risk, whether it's risk to force or risk to mission, and that can come in all shapes and sizes. And that scale of risk is really kind of between timid and reckless. And I think it goes in concert with the scale of failure between blameworthy and praiseworthy. And so we need to be able, in our execution of the strategy, take risks that aren't reckless, right? But they're not timid either. And as mentioned previously, we have to be okay with failure, praiseworthy failure, not necessarily blameworthy. So, and I think also in the execution of that, as you fail, you need to use those as opportunities, one, for self-reflection, and then to just look on the organization, maybe what could I have done differently? What could we have done differently? Could I have given some more resources? Should I emphasize some training a little bit differently? But I think we often focus on technical solutions, and I don't mean necessarily technology, but technical solutions, in that we try to solve it via a technical process. So we say, hey, this is a problem. I can ID it. I'm going to get some quick and easy solutions. I'm going to institute a new process. And that works for something like, a technical problem. Like if I have a process that's broken, or I just need to, clean up this protocol, that works. But often the problems that we're talking about in executing a long-term strategy are more adaptive challenges, very complex, take a long time to find a solution to, and it requires multiple changes in multiple places, and things like your values and your beliefs and your roles and relationships. And so what we sometimes, the failure in of itself is not the problem, it's the fix we try to put on that failure, where we don't identify this as an adaptive problem. So I think when we try to link strategy and execution, we need to make sure we're attacking the right problem, executing the right way to get to that strategy. And I think too that as crazy as this world is, as complex as it's becoming, I think we also need to remember what is not changing. And so, when I played football at the Air Force Academy, there was a sign in one of our meeting rooms, and it said, "The consistent execution of aggressive fundamentals." And that really stuck with me for a long time, and still does. And of course, they were talking about blocking and tackling and just the fundamentals of football. But I think it applies to so much more, especially in the leadership realm, in that if you can identify those key fundamentals of your organization and you can go after them aggressively, and then you can consistently execute them over time, I think the gap between execution and strategies just naturally closes. And so we often get maybe confused with the complexity of today's world, but I think it's important to fall back to those fundamentals. And one of the key fundamentals for me is that character that we talked about before. And so regardless of how technologically advanced this world gets, people's characters will still matter, and the way you treat people, relationships will absolutely matter.
Yeah. A couple of things came to mind as you were speaking, but it really, I think it all just, dwells right into the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset, is that, the strategy itself is not a fixed document.
Right.
Is that, you can adapt it as you go. And so, people who have a fixed mindset, well, they're not going to adapt. But people with a growth mindset, not only will they adapt, they're looking to adapt. Right. And so so it's less than just adapting to a mistake, but they're actually anticipating and forecasting mistakes.
Right.
And they're realizing their humanity right from the beginning, right? Which really opens up so many more possibilities. Okay. Right. As you go through this. But so let me ask you this: when it comes to, that pipeline that you're looking to develop and that ability to adapt, what are some of the things that really, either raises a red flag or just pops right at you, go, wow, this person's got something?
Well, I think it certainly changes as you progress through a career, of course. Mm-hmm. So I think, as I mentioned, the key task of a young officer or enlisted is to become a technical expert. So just by nature of that expectation, those who are the most proficient in those technical tasks, tactical tasks, will kind of rise to the top. But the whole time, we're always looking, or supervisors are hopefully always looking at, their character and judgment as well. So just because you're the best pilot doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be, move on to the next position. Mm-hmm. I think because that's what's very different about the Air Force than maybe some other careers or, fields, is that technical proficiency isn't necessarily all there is. If you want to be only a pilot, well, there's plenty of opportunities to do that outside of the Air Force. But we need you to be more than just a technical expert. So therefore, as you mature, we're looking for you to mature beyond just being a technical expert. And so I think maybe a red flag would be, hey, just because someone's the best pilot in the squadron, but they're not a good teammate, or they have a poor attitude, well, that's certainly going to affect their progression throughout the hierarchy, the organization. And so I think, of course, what you look for are those who are leading kind of above their level. And so when we talk about promotion within the military, it's the potential to serve in the next higher grade. So it's almost like we're looking for those who are acting like the next higher rank already. And so there's different expectations at each rank. And don't get me wrong, there's some difficulties with the way we do our promotion system. Because we are a very linear organization that, kind of focuses on upward mobility in a hierarchical organization. So therefore it becomes very competitive, and sometimes in a sense zero sum, in which one person wins and another one has to lose. But the whole time we're always trying to find the best leaders, and especially as you get older, your technical proficiency becomes less important, and it's more about your leadership ability.
It just seems that, as you were talking, is that, we're talking about strategic execution and executing the strategy, but you're also pulling in concepts of human performance and talent optimization, so they gain that technical mastery. but then it's really about leadership effectiveness and how well that leader affects change within that, within that group who's being groomed for further, leadership responsibilities. So you're actually, basically coalescing and synthesizing all those, all those competencies.
Yeah, I mean, it's all connected, right? And so I think, in the end, if leadership is just generally understood about, communicating through words, actions, example to influence people to move towards something worth doing, then you can't help but think about how effective leaders are, how you're going to change people in order to execute, to align strategy and execution. Of course, you're interested in how people perform. So yeah, I think it all interrelates. And I think sometimes that's some of the complexity in the environment. We try to chunk little sections when really they're all interrelated. And I see that as one of my main jobs too, is to be able, especially in the diverse organization like the 86 OG, is hopefully I'm able to see all the interactions between seemingly non-connected mission sets or squadrons. And so, the squadron leaders do a great job of talking with one another, but hopefully I can view the environment from a different perspective in order to make those connections for them and to hopefully leverage resources in the right place to further the mission.
It just shows you, that the Air Force is a organization that's really built on human capital.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that is a tough, I'm not saying the Air Force doesn't do a good job taking care of people. Like I lived my whole life within the Air Force, and it's been a great experience. Pay, benefits, all those things. Mm-hmm. Human capital side, though, I think what you're alluding to more is it is a hard relationship between performance and accomplishment and kind of personal well-being. It's a complex relationship that I've explored a little bit, and I think the key is that we think of accomplishment as just one piece of our overall well-being. And it's not to say that accomplishments don't matter. It's just accomplishment is one piece of a larger well-being pie. And so effectiveness of or how well you accomplish or achieve something will affect your well-being, but it's not the only piece of that. And so from a human capital perspective, the Air Force and all the services that I'm aware of, I think we're moving in the right direction in order to help our promotion systems and all our kind of structural organizations to try to value something beyond just performance. And that's a very hard job that, hopefully smart people are thinking about, because, when we promote based on achievement alone, how do you measure someone's character or, their values? Yet those are hugely important things that we have to try to mesh.
The individual well-being and organizational accomplishment do not necessarily have to be diametrically opposed and mutually exclusive constructs.
Absolutely.
And when done correctly, that's when they're fused. But that's the challenge, and that's really that's one of the challenges that leaders have. But when done correctly, the effects are exponential.
Right, and I think it's no secret, but I think we should never miss an opportunity to connect the meaning and purpose of what we're doing to the larger mission or effort. And so I think what I try to emphasize is, let's connect this seemingly, trivial task or job, and how does that fit into the larger picture? And so one, it's reminding people that what they do matters and how they do it matters. And so I think when people have a sense of purpose and they engage in that purpose with a positive attitude, it naturally leads to more accomplishment. And then, we continually emphasize relationships, both building and maintaining strong relationships, because that forms that trust in the profession, both within the members themselves and to the society that we serve.
And that sense of purpose has an impact on just about everything that people do. And if they're clear about their purpose, then there are significant positive effects. But if they're not clear about it, that's where things can really get discombobulated and confused. And that's in some ways, that's the string that can be pulled that unravels the whole thing, not just
absolutely,
but also within the organization.
Yeah, and I've seen one of the biggest cancers is just cynicism, right? You lose trust in leadership and in the organization as a whole, because if they lose their sense of purpose, then that cynicism just starts kind of eating away. You're exactly right.
And we live in such a cynical society, but the fact of the matter is that our human nature is that we're looking for purpose. Right? It's part of our evolutionary need.
Right.
So when an organization actually can provide that purpose, even if they're coming from a cynical background, then they're going to be opened up to this whole new way of thinking and doing things. And that just, is basically that's just a mind-blowing experience for some young people. So,
right.
It doesn't have to suck.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, admittingly, I think the Air Force has a pretty easy job in communicating our purpose, right? It's pretty front and center. You see the advertisements and I talked about it right up front. It's about being a part of something bigger than yourself. Mm-hmm. And the military is a fantastic way in order to serve something bigger than yourself. And so in and of itself, there's a purpose right there. So sometimes we just need to be reminded of that. And, when you get bogged down in the day-to-day tasks and, headaches.
Being a civilian and coming from a part of the country that's not, that doesn't have a strong military presence in the New York City metropolitan area, being on the faculty at the Air Force Academy was just, it was kind of like being a fly on the wall, as a civilian, and seeing how this organization is basically indoctrinating their next, their future workforce. And, that sense of purpose was instilled right from the beginning. And you mentioned in what we were talking about before is Marty Segelman. Well, one of his students is a professor at the Penn also, Angie Duckworth, who developed this idea of grit. Okay.
Right.
And she actually studied Army cadets and why they were, were so resilient. And as I looked at the study and looked at her writings, I was thinking, she's missing something. All right. Is that there's so many forces within that culture, and obviously you're a graduate, but you can remember the first day of school every year and how many cadets were in the hallway, right? Not just the hallway, but in the stairwells before the first class, because they're all, they were all juniors, rising juniors. And if they take one step into a class, then they're committed, right? But I remember talking to cadets and telling me, it's just so hard to quit. Right. And right. So there's these other forces involved, but I think it has a lot to do with, okay, if I leave, then what's my purpose?
Right.
Right. And if you advocate that, and leave that up for adoption to something else, that's, as Jerry Seinfeld said, that's a big matzo ball hanging out there.
Yeah. I mean, and grit is that's an effort within the Air Force and over here in Europe, which is great. I mean, it's really based on, let's just get together in small group sessions and kind of talk about important resiliency type topics. But I think the interesting thing about, the Air Force Academy, what you said, and purpose in general, especially within the military, is that I'm not naive to think that everyone, joins for this larger purpose. There's a lot of reasons that people initially join the military. Maybe it's a job, maybe it's they want to fly airplanes. Mm-hmm. They're looking for a way out of a hometown. There's all kinds of reasons. But I think the longer you stay in, the more you start to really internalize that purpose. And so it's great if we can get that earlier, at the Air Force Academy, for instance, or other commissioning programs. But I'm not naive to think that everyone enters with this gung-ho purpose attitude. But hopefully by our example and the fact of that we stress it so much, and that we actually have something worth doing, that people buy into that purpose.
Those latent learning effects, the things that you can't see that are coming around the corner, can be really powerful.
Right. Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you stick with it, you'll see what I'm talking about. All right. So let me ask you this: who were your leadership role models, and what did you learn from them?
Oh man, there's so many role models all throughout my life. It'd be really tough to name, specifics. I suppose I would say my parents, though, first and foremost. They're our first teachers, our coaches, our counselors, everything. And so they really instilled both in me, my brother, and my sister just good values. I think partly too in that, as we were moving around as young kids with my dad in the Air Force, we learned, I think, some good life skills of how to adapt, how to fit in some cases, how to make friends quickly, the value of keeping your mouth shut in some cases. But my parents they're just good human beings. And so they would probably be my first role models. And because a lot of times I think, and, I see it now, right? Leading organizations and parenting isn't that different, right? And a lot of times we talk about, let's not separate the qualities that make us good husbands, fathers, friends, sons, daughters from those qualities that make us good airmen. They're really the same qualities. You need to be a role model. You need to help out. You need to praise when appropriate, discipline when appropriate, plan for the future. All those things apply in both cases. And so my parents did all that. I don't think I would name any specific leaders out there, but I would say the traits that were role model like, and that they were all authentic. All the people that I looked up to, they were all, in a sense, vulnerable, in that I think they were humble. And the way I would, define humble, of course, it's a modest view of your own importance on one hand, but I also think humility is a deep sense of self-awareness, and it is realizing that you're part of something bigger. And so therefore you understand your strengths, and therefore can find ways to contribute to the organization, and then you realize your weaknesses, and so therefore you need to grow. And so the leaders that I really looked up to were those authentic leaders who weren't being phony and who were humble. And that goes hand in hand, I think, with authentic, right? They used their strengths in the right way, and they worked on their weaknesses. And in the end, I think their espoused values and their enacted values were in line. So what they said and what they did matched. And I think that's hugely important.
What you said about confidence and humility is really important, because I come across so many people who have a belief that, well, if you're confident, you can't be humble, or if you're humble, you can't be confident. And they're actually, they're not related in any way.
No.
Grant, another professor at Penn, talks about confident humility, and
right.
I think that's a really great way to think about it. Is that you can be humble and can be confident at the same time. And that comes from what you were talking about, just that greater sense of self-awareness.
Yeah, and I think it's, when you cross the line from confident to cocky, well, now it's a different story. But, confidence, absolutely. It's about knowing how you can best contribute, and being trusting in yourself that your skills can match the situation. That's confidence. There's nothing wrong with that. And that matches perfectly with humility, in my opinion.
Yeah. I don't, the way I define confidence is understanding the difference between what you can do and what you can't do. And when people are trying to do things they can't do, well, that's cockiness. But when people are not trying to do things that they're perfectly capable of doing, right, that gets to be a problem as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that self-awareness is really important. But, obviously it's that humility that keeps you growing, but it's also part of the confidence that says, well, I can continue to grow because of all the other things that I have accomplished.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point.
Right. So let me ask you this, whether you're in Germany or Africa or some of the other places you've been, St. Louis, I saw that you're at Scott Air Force Base.
Yeah.
How do you relax, or how do you celebrate?
Well, personally, I work out. I'm a morning worker outer, and I really enjoy kind of the solitude of the house at that time.
Mhm.
So I get up and it's still dark out here, and I walk my dog as kind of a warm up, and then get a workout. I do a garage gym workout right now, just kind of due to the circumstances. So that of course helps me relax, and I often show up to work and say, hey, while I was walking my dog, I thought of this, because it's just a great time to just think. Or sometimes I'll listen to an audiobook or something like that.
Mhm.
So, taking care of myself physically, I think working out is a good release and a relaxation. And then, my family and I love to travel. My wife is an avid traveler, did a lot even before we were married. And then the Air Force has provided us an awesome opportunity, to live over here in Europe. So, last time we were here, every opportunity we had, kind of get out, see a different culture. I think that's an education in of itself. And I'm so happy to be able to provide that to my kids, just to see different perspectives and cultures and eat new foods and experience new things. Now, granted, they would complain about walking through another city to see another cathedral, but it'll be good for them in the end.
Yeah.
So we travel a lot, but I think the celebration thing, we celebrate birthdays, in our family, make it a big deal for our kids, especially. But I think too, at the office, in that we celebrate, and it's not necessarily like today, there's someone's birthday who was on Sunday. So we had a little kind of party, and it's nothing crazy, something small, but just the fact of kind of recognizing them, and really the larger concept of just having fun at work is kind of way we relax and celebrate. And I think that drives too into kind of a conversation about what's often termed work-life balance, which I think is a misnomer. One, in that, work is one thing and life is the other. And, and really what people are talking about is home, work and home. And so, if we really think a balance of even on both ends, that would be naive to think that. So I think it's work home integration and harmony, some people have heard. And I think it's just, what I don't also like about work-life balance is that it implies that you're two different people. And I talked about this earlier, that I think we bring all of ourselves to work and we bring all of ourselves to home. And so I think when you have this more fluid, instead of there's a boundary here between work and home, then I think it allows you to, be present at both and to kind of integrate. And therefore the fun, the relaxation, the celebration isn't something you only do outside of work. You also do it at work. And so, and you have to be careful with that, because I don't want people on the job all the time. But I think when we bring ourselves to home and to work and we're the same person in both, then that relaxation and fun and celebration can occur in both cases.
Well, when people do make, a significant change between those two environments, it certainly represents an inconsistency of character.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's always a red flag.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that goes back to, hopefully, we are the same. The qualities that make us a good father, husband, whatever, are the same that make us good airmen. So hopefully you're not flipping a switch at home or at work, and you're consistent throughout. And like you said, someone of character all the time.
Yeah. Well, Sean, I want to thank you so much for agreeing to do this. It's been a pleasure and a privilege. And I'd like to thank you for all the work you do and keeping our country safe. So,
well, thank you, Doc Long. I really appreciate the opportunity. It was awesome talking to you, and really appreciate your thank you. So thank you for all that you're doing for the leadership community.
All right. Well, certainly it's my pleasure. All right. So thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time on the X Factor.